I am Sgro from Quality, North Carolina, and I am here to talk to you today about Senate Bill 2, our license to discriminate, or one of the 5 on the other side of that we beat 80 of 85 bills statistic, not bitter at all, or coming soon to a legislature near you. So the background. We had marriage equality on October 10th of 2014 through our federal ruling, and lots of people were very happy about it. And a couple of folks were not so happy about it. I don't think I can curse in a FEDTalk, but if I could, I would have some expletives to say about this man, who is Senator Phil Berger, the Senate President and #1 opponent of LGBT rights in all of North Carolina. He stood on the steps in Rockingham County, his home county, and promised to introduce legislation in this session that would say magistrates, a word that I didn't really know what it meant before this whole fun conversation, who are the only people in North Carolina who can conduct civil services that are a mandatory piece of civil marriage, that they would be able to religiously opt out of their obligations. And so a little bit about the legislative process here. Right, so this is the actual verbiage of the legislation. A little bit about the legislative process. We had a big RFRA in North Carolina, which is the hidden positive story of this. It was defeated after big, sexy outrage in Indiana. Republican leadership in North Carolina said, you know what, we actually don't want to touch that with a 10-foot pole. But this sounds like a great compromise, this weird Senate Bill 2. So that's what we ended up with. We, as everybody else who has been up here today, had supermajorities in both chambers of conservative leadership, and so we handily had this passed in both chambers once it came up. But we had an unlikely hero of the day, and that is Republican Governor Pat McCrory, who came out and said that he would not actually support this, and he did in fact veto the legislation. So we then had this immediately go back to the state Senate, where it was handily, the governor's veto was handily overridden by a 3/5 majority, and so we took our fight to the House. And we thought that we had the votes in the House to sustain of 3/5 present and voting. And the leadership, as you can see from our great allies, Cecil Brockman and Pricey Harrison, leadership waited until a huge number of conservative Democrats and more liberal Republicans' mothers were all in the hospital at the exact same time on the exact same day and couldn't be at session that day, and put it forward for a vote. And we lost that vote by 3 votes, which is the same number of Democratic votes that we lost on this. This is Speaker Moore, who said exactly what we knew was going to happen, which is they waited until they knew that they had the votes. And so the problem is that there's the intended discrimination against same-sex couples. But in order to broadly word this so that they could get around a direct targeting, they said that any magistrate could opt out of conducting marriage for any reason, whether you don't like marrying interfaith couples or interracial couples or any other kind of couple. So there's incredible broad impact here that made it less palatable to North Carolinians, but more palatable to the legislature to pass. So what did we do about it in the lead up? We had an incredible fight with Equality North Carolina, the ACLU of North Carolina, and the Human Rights Campaign here with a wide-scale media campaign, 20,000 signatures to the legislature, and even getting the first interracial couple to be turned away in the state of North Carolina in the 70s to speak out and say why they were so opposed to this legislation. So we had some great successes. Unfortunately, it was not. We had incredible coverage on both social and traditional media. Unfortunately, it was not successful. So I want to talk a little bit about the bad news and the good news. The bad news is that I think there's an ALEC conference going on sometime soon, and I bet that they're going to talk about Senate Bill 2, and I bet a lot of y'all are going to see it in your next session now that we have marriage equality. So please be on the lookout for this. The good news is that it is beatable. Republicans were not unanimous in their support of this at all, and it is easy to provide cracks in the armor. The problem here for how to beat it. Word of caution is that the business community does not understand this as well as they understand big RFRA. So that is a lift that still is incumbent upon us all to make sure that the business community with RFRAs like this and with RFRAs like what we saw in Michigan, that they understand the dangers there. So hopefully, with a little bit of help from what the campaigns that you've seen here in Michigan and North Carolina, even though we weren't ultimately successful, you can beat more narrowly targeted RFRAs in your states. Thanks.